2,500 years ago, the angel Gabriel delivered an astonishing message to the prophet Daniel concerning the 70 years captivity of Judah. Daniel was given a cryptic code concerning 70 Shevaim, which would be fulfilled in 3 separate but interwoven layers throughout the history of the nation of Israel. That divine prophecy has been sealed up until the generation when increased revelation and scientific knowledge would allow mankind to understand its complex mathematical codes. Understanding this prophecy has been the lifelong quest of biblical historian Michael Rood. After 30 years of searching the chronological details of Yahshua's ministry, the 3 prophetic layers of Daniel's prophecy, for the first time in history, seem to be coming into clear focus. If Michael's calculations are correct, the nation of Israel is already in the 3rd prophetic layer of Daniel's prophecy, and the countdown to the thermonuclear ruin of Damascus prophesied by the prophet Isaiah has already begun. The solution to the Jonah Code, which was over 30 years in coming, has proven to be the foundational equation of this historic discovery. Join Michael Rood for nearly 10 hours of programming that will change your life and your perspective of the future. Michael will have you on the edge of your seat as he teaches the greatest story never told, the Jonah Code.
Now we come to the Chodesh, the renewed moon. When the new moon is then sighted, that is the first day of the month, and you can go ahead and number the calendar to 30 days. You don't know if we're going to have 30 days, but you can number that far, because we won't know until the sliding of the first sliver of the new moon again, whether it was a 29-day or a 30-day month, and I'll show you why in just a minute. The next question is, when does the year begin? In Exodus we read that when we were in the land of Egypt, just before our deliverance, it says that the flax and the barley were smitten in the plague of hail because the barley was aviv. The King James translators translated it, the barley was in the ear, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But again, the King James translators were not agricultural specialists in the land of Israel. They just did the best they could, and they translated the word aviv about 6 different ways. And it says, and the flax, which was also destroyed, was givol. What does givol mean? King James translators translated it as bold, but what does bold mean? It is an ancient Hebrew agricultural term that refers only to the ripening of flax. And then it says, but the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were aphilot. What does aphilot mean? Again, it's an ancient Hebrew agricultural term. I'm only going to define 1 or 2 of these terms to you, but this is important to understand when the year begins according to the Creator's reckoning of time. Yahweh spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt and said, this month, this Chodesh, the Chodesh of the Aviv barley, shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month, the Chodesh of the year to you. Because this day came you out in the Chodesh of Ha-Aviv, and the Chodesh in the renewed moon of the Aviv. The Aviv, what does Aviv refer to? It's speaking of the maturity of the barley crop. We know the barley was destroyed because it was what? Aviv. It's reached that level of maturity which it was brittle. And it says, it shall be when Yahweh shall bring thee into the land, that thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread in this Chodesh, in this month. What month? The month of the Aviv. And then it continues to say, the feast of unleavened bread shalt thou keep. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, as I commanded thee, in the time of the Chodesh of Ha-Aviv, the month of the Aviv. For in the month of the Aviv you came out of Egypt. Again, telling us this is the first month of the year to us. This is when we keep the feast of unleavened bread. And the 14th day of the first month at even is Yahweh's Passover. On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Now this is all important because we have to ask the question, why do we always keep the Passover in the month of the Aviv barley? Why is the month of the Aviv barley always the first month of the year? This is the Creator's reckoning of time. Why is it important? You shall bring a sheaf of the firstfruits, the bikurim of your harvest, unto the priest. On the day after the Sabbath, which is the Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the priest shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted for you. And you shall eat neither new bread, nor parched barley corn, nor carmel or mature grain, until the same day that you bring an offering unto your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all of your dwellings. For us to have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we must have the barley to reach the stage of Aviv, or for it to be mature enough to where we can, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, present the first fruits of the barley in the temple as the wave offering. If the barley is not ripe enough to do that, we cannot have the first month of the year. And so that is why every spring, at the end of the 12th month, we check the barley in the land of Israel. If the barley is ripe, if it's Aviv, then we will then call this the month of the Aviv, and we will then have the Feast of Passover and unleavened bread and do the first fruit offering that month. If the barley is not Aviv, then we cannot have the first fruit offering that month, and so we add a 13th month onto the year. Ladies and gentlemen, this is extremely important, because the most critical date in our generation transpired without anyone having any idea of when it happened and what happened on that date, because we have all forsaken the Creator's reckoning of time. One of the most significant points in history has already taken place, and no one understood it, and it went right by everyone on the planet, because neither I nor you had awakened to the Creator's restored calendar. And when I show this to you, then that will open the door for us to understand the third layer of Daniel's 70 Shavuot prophecy that has already begun. And that is where we're going in these next 2 nights. So this is just not academics, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Almighty running the universe according to His calendar and His time clock. The first thing that He did was He wakened us up in time to understand that He does run this universe according to His calendar. He makes and He breaks His covenants according to His calendar. Now, I misspoke. He makes His covenants, and He breaks Israel's covenant with death and agreement with hell, which He said He would annul with violence. And all we had to do was understand His calendar, and we could then specify and say what day it was going to happen. See, September 28th, 2000, before sundown in Jerusalem. Why did I even say a pagan date? Because most people would not recognize if I said the biblical date. That's why I had to give a date that everyone would understand in the Gentile thinking and speaking world. And when it happened, you wouldn't believe what took place. Those who wanted to ignore the Creator's reckoning of time then immediately manufactured a lie saying that I said Jesus was going to return before sundown, September 28th of 2000. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the most ridiculous thing. That's why I wrote, many years before then, the book, The Mystery of Iniquity. The subtitle, The Legal Prerequisites to the Return of the Messiah. There are some things that have to take place before Yeshua can return. He is not going to be back next week, next year, or even 5 years from now. There are things that must transpire, and until those things take place, He cannot and He will not return. Now, I know that's contrary to what I taught for over 20 years as a paid professional false prophet, as an ultra-dispensational, pre-tribulation secret rapturist, but I've had to repent. I was wrong. I was a false prophet, and now I will tell you the truth. I will prophesy something for you tonight. Thus saith the Lord, there is no pre-tribulation rapture. Now, I know for many of you that's awfully hard to hear, but that's why I wrote the book. That is my repentance, because things have to get cleared up. The book of Revelation was written to the servants of the Messiah who need to know the things that are going to be taking place. The book of Revelation was not written to the pew warmer, the innocent bystander, or the casual Christian. It was written to servants. And the servants need to be ready to deal with the hard stuff, because that is what's on the horizon. The United States is embroiled in a situation over in the East that there is no easy way out of this. In fact, there's no way out. Things are going to shake down, but in this seminar, you are going to see that the Almighty has told us what to expect, and He's told us when we see this trouble, these wars and these threats of wars, this terrorism come to pass, don't be troubled. We have a different job to do. The world is going to be shaken to its foundation. The religious systems of this world are going to find out that they're on sand, on very wet sand. And when those buildings begin to topple, then you have to be ready to do what you are called to do. So, this is a statute forever. The Creator's reckoning of time is not to be trifled with. You can play with it, you can dismiss it, you can believe the lies out there, but you have an opportunity to hear the truth, and this is where we're going to take you concerning the biblical calendar. Now, at the top of the calendar, here you see the first month, the month of the Aviv. Over on the right-hand side, we also, in our calendar, to help you coordinate it with the other calendars of the world, you will see that we also have the rabbinic date. See, all of the months were then named after we came out of Babylon. This is the month of Nisan. Apparently, we drove a lot of Japanese cars when we were coming out of Babylon. Over on the left is March, named after Mars, the god of war, and Aprilis, another pagan fertility goddess. And now I'm going to present to you the perpetual biblical Hebrew calendar and Feast of the Lord calculator as an inset here to help you understand the calendar. First of all, we see that when the first sliver of the new moon appears, until the new moon appears again, the course is 29.530587 days. That means it's either going to be a 29-day month or a 30-day month, one of the other. It's never more, it's never less. And it's dependent upon the sighting of the new moon in the land of Israel. That is where the Creator's reckoning of time is reckoned from that point. We also see that here, the beginning of the year, I put the vernal equinox usually occurs a few weeks before to a few days after the barley in the land of Israel is Aviv. Now, why did I use that terminology, the vernal equinox? Because that is a Babylonian calculation of the day in the spring in which there's equal daylight and equal darkness. Now, a lot of people like to use the vernal equinox to determine the beginning of the year, but that is not the biblical method. I would like it to be. You know why I would like it? Because then I could calculate the feast and I could make my calendar 5,000 years in advance. But that's not the way the Almighty has it. He's the one that controls the growing seasons. When He sends the sun and the rain and the clouds, He has us dependent upon Him. And so when the barley is Aviv, the barley is Aviv. The first time the new moon appears after the barley is Aviv, it's the month of the Aviv barley. Do you control it? Do I control it? No. He alone is in control of it. The modern Jewish calendar was invented in the year 359 of the Common Era by Rabbi Hillel II in Tiberias. The last act of the Sanhedrin before disbanding themselves was to make a takanot, a law which changed biblical law, and they changed the way that the calendar was reckoned from that moment on. Even though it took most Jews 400 years to finally accept that calendar, that is the calendar that everyone knows about in the Jewish world today. The Gentile Christian world basically got the calendar right straight from Babylonian sun god worship and has nothing to do with the Bible at all. So, we both have things that we have to learn from this. Now, once we have the new moon of the Aviv barley, we then simply count 10 days, and that brings us to Passover. Very important if we're going to understand the Gospels, because this is the bracket to understand when Yeshua's ministry began and when his ministry was fulfilled. So we see the Passover lamb was selected on the 10th day of the month. It's inspected for 4 days, and then in the afternoon, the late afternoon, called even in Old King James English, that is when the Passover lambs, they are sacrificed on the afternoon of the 14th. They are put in the oven before sundown. And then when the sun sets, it is now the 15th day of the month. It is the high Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It doesn't matter what day of the week it occurs on, it's always a high Sabbath or high rest day. Could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it doesn't matter. Whenever the sun sets at the 15th, then after the sun sets and the lambs are finished roasting, the lambs are brought out of the oven and they are eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. It is the Passover Seder. The Feast of Unleavened Bread begins. Now, sometime during this week, we will always have a weekly Sabbath. And at the end of the weekly Sabbath, as the sun sets, there is a prescribed rehearsal that we go through right after the sun sets every year that culminates the following morning on the first day of the week, Sunday morning, in which we present the first fruits of the barley harvest in the temple after the sun comes up the following day. And when we present the first fruits, at that point, we then will count 7 Sabbath days, and the day after the 7th Sabbath will be the 50th day, and that will be Shavuot, or it is the Feast of Weeks. The Greeks called it Pentecost, which it means the 50th day, but they were missing the point because it's really the counting of the 7 Sabbaths that is so important, and you'll see that in just a minute. So once we have the calendar blocked out, we are then going to add another line here on our calendar that is available to all of you. And this calendar, then this line here, you see that the line begins right in the middle of the black period. This line begins at midnight. This is the pagan or Babylonian calendar that you are all so familiar with. Now, the reason why we put that in there is that while you're learning the biblical reckoning of time, if you ever lose track of what the date is, all you have to do is leave your house, walk down the street, and look for a pagan. When you find a pagan, ask them what the date is, then come back home, look at your calendar, look right above the pagan date, and there is the biblical date. It's like we have thought of everything on this calendar for you, okay? And if you have any questions, you can always call our office because our phone number is on the bottom of every single page of our calendar. So there's no need to go through any questions on that. So once you have the head of the year, then you know when Passover is going to be. When you know when the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins, and you know when it ends, then you're going to see all the details concerning the feast. Now, this is very important. It says, you shall count unto you from the day after the weekly Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, from the very day that you brought the wave offering, 7 complete Sabbaths. You count 7 complete Sabbaths. So, right here, from the day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, from the day after the Sabbath, here is the Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the very next day is the day of first fruits. From that day, we count 7 Sabbath days. And when we count 7 Sabbath days, the day after the 7th Sabbath, you shall number 50 days. And we offer a new meal offering unto Yahweh. And so from this day, we count 7 Sabbaths. and we come to the 49th day, or the 7th Sabbath. The following day is Shavuot. That is the Creator's reckoning of time, that every year he told us to do this. And every year as we do it, we are asking ourselves the question, why in the world are we doing this? We know that these are all prophetic shadow pictures of good things to come. We know that this is not one of the things that Yeshua fulfilled. He, in fact, ascended 10 days before this in the middle of nowhere. And so we always ask ourselves this question. And it says, we shall bring 2 wave loaves baked with leaven. They are the bikurim of the wheat harvest, the first fruits unto Yahweh. And that's what we do at Shavuot. Now, the counting of the 7 Sabbaths until Shavuot is a microcosm of the counting of the Jubilee. Now listen to this. When we came out of Egypt, we were told that when we enter the land of Israel, in other words, we have something to do yet. We have to enter the land. And when we enter the land, we are to count 7 years, and the 7th year is a Sabbath year. That year the land is to rest. We are not to plant, we are not to harvest, the land is to rest completely. Then we are to count 7 Sabbath years. That'll be the 49th year, and then the year after that is the Jubilee year, in which all the land goes back to the original owners. Now, every single year, the counting of the Omer is that microcosm. We do not know until the barley is Aviv when we are going to have the month of the Aviv and have Passover. Until we see the new moon appear and the barley is Aviv, we can't count and even find out when Passover is going to be for that year. But once we find out when it's going to be, and we find the weekly Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, then the day after we count 7 Sabbaths. 7 sevens. And the day after will be Shavuot. It is a microcosm of the counting of the Jubilee years. Now, this is very important because this is what is going to take us into an understanding of where we are in history right now, because one of these countings has transpired, and we're going to see it. So there you have the basis of the astronomically corrected and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. And this is why you must understand this reckoning of time, because this is how the next years are going to play out for you. And so now we are going to step into the 3 days and the 3 nights. Okay. Oh boy. It's not supposed to be happening here. When the Pentium chip first came out, computer experts and mathematicians found that there was an error in the math coprocessor. After so many billions of computations, that the math coprocessor broke down, that the math did not work. And what would happen is this would show up on your screen. Now, sometimes when this happens with your computer, there's nothing you can do. I've had it testify to me many people who have thrown their computer away once this blue screen came up, and it never ever came back because there's an error in the math. It would not process anything correctly. You'd say, wait, I don't process billions of calculations. Oh, yes, you do. If you are manipulating a picture, if you're doing a vector-based program, if you're doing video, anything like that, you are computing just billions and billions of bits of information. And if there's an error in the math, then it won't process it correctly. there is only one sign that Yeshua said of his authenticity, one sign of his authority, and that is the Jonah code. He said that the sign of Jonah, that Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, in the grave. And there is no way that this one sign, in which we are told that Yeshua died on Good Friday and got up on Easter Sunday, no way that 3 days and 2 nights equals 3 days and 3 nights with a resurrection on the third day. There is a fatal error. And I submit to you that the one sign of Yeshua's authenticity is also the one sign that we have been given another Jesus, a false Jesus. One that some people say, what difference does it make that we can't count to 3? You know, many nights we have a lot of pastors come out to these, and you know, I'm really your pastor's best friend, you know, because you know the embarrassment of when the second graders come up after the Easter Sunday morning message and say, but pastor, you can't get 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And, you know, as we're feverishly shaking hands, trying to get everyone out the door, back home to eat their ham dinner as fast as possible, we know the embarrassment because we know we don't have an answer to it. And I've heard some pastors say, you know, it doesn't make any difference. Yeshua said it dozens of times, it doesn't make any difference. Well, you know, that person is absolutely true. It doesn't make any difference. If having a nice house, a good job, a car, having good schools for your children to go to and college, a retirement home for yourself, and then when it's all over, a 6-foot hole in the ground, if that's the goal, it doesn't matter. But if truth matters, if Yeshua's words matter, then these things matter. The one sign, we only got one, can we get it right? So to understand these things, we are going to take you into Yeshua's ministry, and this is where the excitement begins. Now, first of all, John 2 details the Messiah's first Passover after his ministry begins. You remember that he comes up to Jerusalem and he finds the money changers up on the Temple Mount, those who are buying and selling temple sacrifice animals, the doves, the goats, and the lambs, all of which were legal to be done down below off the Temple Mount. But the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, had given them permission to bring their wares up onto the Temple Mount. Yeshua got there just before the Feast of Passover, and he made a whip of cords, and he drove the animals off the Temple Mount, took the money changers' boxes and overthrew them, broke open the cages for the doves, and said, "Get these animals out of here. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." He tore it up. And when he did this, immediately it says that then answered the Jews, "What sign do you show us, seeing that you do these things? We gave them the authority. We gave them permission to be up here. Who are you? What authority do you do this?" Now, there's something interesting here that you need to understand when you read the Gospel of John. Then answered the Jews. The Gospel of John, every time there is something negative that's being said, it says the Jews did this, the Jews did that, the Jews did something else. And, you know, all you have to do is step back for a minute and read the rest of it and say, well, the people that are believing are Jews, the people who are getting healed are Jews, the disciples are Jews, Yeshua's a Jew. How come it's using Jews all in a negative context? It sounds very anti-Jewish when everybody's Jewish. Well, it's the first chapter of John that defines the very terms. Every time the term the Jews is used, it is always referring to the Pharisee religious leaders. Every single time. And so now just plug that information in so you see now we're talking about the Sanhedrin up on the Temple Mount. The Pharisee religious leaders who had given these people the authority to buy and sell up on the Temple Mount, I assert for the very same reason that you don't bring your own popcorn into The movie theater. Because once you have a captive audience, it's always going to cost you more, and there's always a kickback involved. That's where the popcorn costs you a lot. If you buy them down in the marketplace where it's free trade, then, and bring up your animals up to the Temple Mount for the sacrifice, then you get a better bargain. But they had worked it out, and the Pharisees gave them permission, and so they said to him, "What sign do you show us, seeing that you do these things?" Yeshua said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." Now, they didn't know that he was speaking of his body, but that's exactly what he's saying. You destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. And exactly a year later, they did exactly that. They destroyed his body, and in 3 days, he raised it up. This is the first time that he prophesied this. Now we continue. And Matthew says, "Then certain of the scribes and Pharisees said, 'Master, we would see a sign from thee.' Yeshua said unto them, 'An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but there shall be no sign given unto it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah.'" So there is actually one sign, right? He said no sign but, and so we do have a sign, and what is it? It is a sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, he's not real happy with these people, an evil and adulterous generation. The word generation is offspring. Remember in another place it said, "You are of your father, the devil." Speaking of offspring. You're the offspring of an evil and adulterers. And then he said, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Can we all read it? 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And he continued on. The Pharisees also came with the Sadducees, tempting him, and desired that he would show them a sign from heaven. He gently and tenderly answered them so as not to hurt their feelings, and said unto them, see, you notice that's all in italics. See, whenever the King James translators added words and complete phrases that weren't in the text, they added them in italics. So I do the same thing. He answered them and said, "Hypocrites!" This is the Greek word hypocrite. It is the mask that one wears in Greek theater. I'm playing a role. I'm eliciting a response from you. I'm going to try to get you to buy into my world. And I do it by wearing a hypocrite, a mask. It says, I'm not playing your games. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. The word wicked is interesting because it's from the Old English word to twist fibers together to make a candle wick. And adultery has to do with the worship of pagan gods. And if what you do is twist this one sign around the worship of pagan gods, you will never, ever be able to count to 3. And that's what we've done. We've twisted this one sign around Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and we are completely lost because we can't read the Gospels and understand that Yeshua is fulfilling the feast of the Lord, not a pagan fertility rite. And he said, but no sign shall be given unto it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah, and he left them and departed. As if to say, if you people can't count to 3, I am out of here. And Luke, it reports, an evil generation seeks a sign, but there shall be no sign except the sign of Jonah the prophet. Just as Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites, so shall also the Son of Man be to this generation. Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites. So now we are going to break the Jonah code. In order to do that, we have to go back to the scriptures to find out what was going on in Jonah's life. Because it tells us that Jeroboam, this is the great-great-grandson of the Jeroboam that separated Israel from Judah. Remember, Jeroboam separated the 10 northern tribes from Rehoboam? Jeroboam then forbid any of the Israelites in the north to go down and celebrate the feast at Jerusalem. He then set up a golden calf at Bethel and at Dan. He then made a feast in the 8th month, like the Feast of Tabernacles, but it wasn't the Feast of Tabernacles. And we see that generations later, Jeroboam, his great-great-grandson, restored the coast of Israel from the entering of Hamath unto the sea of the plain, according to the word of Yahweh, God of Israel, which he spake by the hand of his servant Jonah the prophet. Now we see what takes place. Jonah was a prophet. Now, a prophet's job is not to foretell the future, okay? A prophet's job is to call people back to the Torah, back to the commandments. The Torah is described as the fence around God's people. If you're inside the fence, you're within the safety of God's instructions. You're not going to get hurt. False prophets are typified as those who come in and break the wall down, and so God's people go out wandering outside the fence, and they end up getting eaten by the wolves. A true prophet comes and stands in the breach, stands in the gap, and says, this is where the wall was. Everyone stay inside. In fact, there's nobody inside. All of you get back inside. Now, if you don't get back inside, if you don't obey the instructions, then I'm going to foretell your future, and it ain't going to be a pretty picture. That's a prophet's job. A prophet is not a fortune teller or a soothsayer. That's sort of modern prophets in America. You know, we receive an offering to release the anointing. We line up, and what do we hear? Nothing but soothing sayings about people's future fortunes. No one's being called back to be obedient to God's word. It's just, hey, you know, you're just going to live a prosperous life. It's only getting rosier from here. That's a fortune teller and a soothsayer. Jonah was a prophet. And it says that because he spoke the word, that Jeroboam acted on it, and part of the land of Israel was restored, from Hamath unto the sea of the plain. Now, what's the sea of the plain? The Sea of Galilee. The Sea of the Galilee region. Now, why is it called the Sea of the Galilee? Because in Hebrew, it's called the Kinneret. Why the Kinneret? Because Kinnor in Hebrew is harp. And this is a Kinnor right here. The Kinneret is the shape of a harp, just like this. That's why I put this up here for you. This is the Sea of Galilee. It's the Kinneret. It's the shape of a Kinnor. Okay, so I'm going to take you around the topography here for just a minute so that you get acquainted with it. This is the Mount Hermon is right up here. It is a snow-capped mountain in the wintertime, and the Dan River comes out of it, then goes into the Jordan, and the Jordan flows into the Kinneret right about here, right near Bethsaida, okay? And then the Jordan flows out right down here and goes down to the Dead Sea. Right over here on this shore is Tiberias. Up here is Migdal, or the tower. Right here is Gennesar, Nath Gennesar. This is where Yeshua spent a good bit of time at Capernaum. This is Bethsaida right here. And over here we have the northernmost cities of the Decapolis, the Roman cities. Right up here is where I live, and this is the Golan Heights right here, and I live right across from the Golan Heights. And so this is what I get to look at if I ever get to go home. Been here for 4 months. I'm getting homesick. But we are going to use this to help understand Yeshua's travels and what he was doing. But Jeroboam, because he was obedient to what to what Jonah said, part of the land of Israel was restored. What does that mean? Is that they had gotten so deep into pagan sun god worship, they are about to get thrown out of the land. The Syrians had come against them several times. There had been wars. They had been really beaten up because they had rejected the word of the Almighty. And there was big trouble in the land of Israel. Jonah spoke the word, and the king obeyed, and part of the land got cleaned up. The people forsook their pagan sun god worship. All the stuff that from Easter and all that was brought over by the Canaanites, they had then started to come out of it. These were now other ministers and other prophets, friends of Jonah, who had all gotten on board, and they were getting the land of Israel cleaned up for the first time in hundreds and hundreds of years. And once part of it was done, then the word of Yahweh came unto Jonah, Jonah 1:1, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, cry against that great city, for their wickedness is come up before me." The words "before me" are very interesting, because now he's told to go to Nineveh, which is a Gentile city, and cry out against it. Their wickedness is come up before me. It's the same words of Exodus 23, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me or in my face." Their wickedness has come up in my face. I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to tell these people to get their act cleaned up, because they have other gods in my face. These are Gentiles, folks. These are not Israelites up in Nineveh. Now, to understand this, as Genesis 10 tells us, Nimrod began to be a mighty one in the earth. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel in the land of Shinar. We know what happened to his kingdom, don't we? The Almighty came in and confused the languages, and he says he divided the nations according to the number of the sons of Israel. He divided the nations into 70 nations, but yet the sons of Israel were not yet born. He had a plan of calling out a nation of priests and prophets. He confused the languages at Babel and divided Babylonian sun god worship up all over the world. The names of the gods were changed. The religious system stayed the same, but these divergent people began to war with each other and could not get together their one world government again. Oh, until recently. This is in Strasbourg, Alsace-Lorraine. This is the Parliament of the European Union. This is the Parliament building right there. It looks like at first that it might not be quite finished yet, but no, this building is finished. This is built to be a replica of a painting that was done back in the early 1900s of the ancient Tower of Babel. This is saying to the world, we are rebuilding Nimrod's Babylon. We are bringing the world together in Babylon once again. That is what this is saying. See, when the Almighty confused the languages, he did choose a people out to be his priest to the entire world. And now Jonah is told to go to Nineveh. Now we're going to find out what happened. After the confusion of the languages, it says in Genesis 10, Asher, the second son of Shem, went forth from the land of Shinar after the confusion of the languages, and he built Nineveh. The word Nineveh means the house of Ninus, the house of Nimrod. In fact, the three cities that he built, one of them to this day is still called Nimrod. And when it talks about the house of Ninus or the house of Nimrod, he is talking about all the gods of Babylon that were worshipped there. Asher, who was a son of Shem, Noah's son Shem. From Shem came Abraham and the believer's line. But Shem's second son, Asher, he built the house of Nimrod in Assyria. And this is what he built. First of all, this you'll notice right here, this is an Assyrian priest. Notice the beard. This will let you know that it is Assyrian. The makeup, the beard, and this is Dagon, the Assyrian or Assyrian fish god. Dag in Hebrew means fish. The Philistines also worshiped Dagon, did they not? Okay? Remember, they brought the Ark of the Covenant into the temple of Dagon. In the morning, they found Dagon was fallen over, and the only thing left was his fishy part standing up. Well, this is the priest of Dagon right here. Here you see the fish head, right? the mitered hat with the fish eye, here are the gills, and here are the scales and fins in his cape. At least it's a kosher fish. Okay? But this is from Assyria. Dagon was worshipped on Good Friday. That's the high day of the worship of Dagon. Notice he's, apparently it's a prosperity gospel. Notice he's wearing a Rolex. Looks like a Rolex. Here is a crypt in the Pope's Museum. Again, it's Assyrian. Notice the beard, the nomenclature of the beard. But these are the priests right here. Notice the fish hat, the fish head, the eye, the fins and scales going all the way down in the cape, and the beard. Again, the close-up of this, the Assyrian beard. Again, these are priests of Dagon. This is Sybil. Now, the worship of Sybil also came out of Assyria. You notice, again, the mitered hat and the cape that goes down her back. Again, the symbols of Dagon worship. Here you see the spikes coming out of her head. These are like the spikes you see on the Statue of Liberty. Those of you who don't know, the Statue of Liberty is the exact replica of the statue of Easter, which is in the Post Museum that was taken out of Babylon. Okay? Now, you can thank the French for bringing that over here to us. You notice that in her hands is the symbol for the American Medical Association. Right? See it? The priests of Sybil were called fathers. The priestesses were called sisters. Okay? Now here is another priest of Dagon. You'll notice, oh, look at the sign that he's making with his hand. Notice that? Where did we see that before? Jupiter. Jupiter. Notice the fish hat. Notice the cape and the equidistant cross. Winter solstice, summer solstice, vernal and autumnal equinox. Okay? There it is. So right here, this is in this religious system, the priests are called fathers, and the priestesses or nuns are called sisters. It's basically the same thing. It is taken right straight from Assyrian Dagon worship. Here you see, oh, look at the cross. This is the cross of Tammuz, later called the cross of Mithra by Constantine and his followers. And again, the mitered hat. And then here we have one of the priests of Dagon. I don't know who this is, but and again, see this equidistant cross right here? Again, the same sun image here. So that's what happens if you worship Dagon. It's a sad thing there. Here you see, this is Saint Nicholas. Nicholas, Nike means conqueror. Remember what Yeshua hates in the book of Revelation? The doctrines and deeds of the Nicolaitans. Nico, conqueror. Laity, the people. The conqueror of the people. Notice the fish hat. Notice the green cape going down. And look at, he's got a cross in his hand right from Tammuz worship. Many of you are probably more familiar with the Phrygian cap here, which is more popular here in America, but it's the same Saint Nico, okay, conqueror. And of course, we have, goes right back to Tammuz and Mithra with his Phrygian cap there. He's got the whole world. Oh, excuse me, I just lost my mind for a moment. Yeah, so Mithra is shown with the world in his hands. That is that's a symbol. He's got the whole world in his hands. And so it's important to understand that some of the things that we have inherited in the Western world, when we find out that we've inherited some things that are not clean, that they're not right, then we do have a tendency to shed a few tears. But it's only right, because that is what the Almighty said would happen. The Gentiles would cry out in repentance for the abominations they inherited, and that's all you can do. When you inherit something from your forefathers, you can't help what you inherited. Your father couldn't help what he inherited, but we can repent when we find out that The Almighty said, do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not learn how they worship and serve their gods and do the same thing and say you're doing it to me, because it's an abomination. It's utterly detestable, repulsive, putrid, and vile. He does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And this is the world that Jonah was sent to speak out against. Now, this is an altar of Easter, or Astarte. This is where the priest of Easter would impregnate virgins on the altar of Easter on Easter Sunday sunrise service, and then a year later sacrifice those 3-month-old babies and dye the eggs in the blood of those sacrificed babies. Here you can see right on the side, notice what they're doing? They are now offering a pig as part of the whole worship cult of Easter. Okay, I guess we don't need to make a whole lot of comment about that version of Easter, or Dinah of the Ephesians. She comes in many varieties. Here's Easter on a stick in downtown Rome. Here's an Israelite Easter, a Canaanite Easter from the land of Israel, and another. Here he's holding 2 different versions of Easter. Downtown Jerusalem, you can buy these $6,000 for the pair. These are antiquities. These are over 3,000 years old. See, in the Western world, when we say Easter, we think of one thing. But in the Eastern world, when you say Easter, this is what everyone over there thinks of immediately. They know who Easter is. There's no question. And when you say Happy Easter, this is what they think of. So it's important that we understand, if we are going to communicate the gospel to people around the world, we have to understand the language that we're speaking and how it affects people in a part of the world that grew up with Easter and with Nimrod and with Dagon and with all these things that we think are part of following Yeshua, but they're nothing but Babylonian sun god worship, and the entire Eastern world knows it. That's the embarrassing thing. It's really hard to provide a clean witness to those who live in that part of the world when Christians bring over all this stuff and are completely ignorant that this is where it all came from. So it's just time to lay some of these old fossilized traditions down, let them die a natural death. Whether it's on the roadside or otherwise. Now, the word of Yahweh came unto Jonah, saying, arise, go to Nineveh. Cry against that great, and I added the word Gentile to drive it home to you. He is not being sent to Judah. He's not being sent to Israel. He is being sent to a nation, an entire country of Gentiles. Because the Almighty divided up these nations, and he said, I am going to make a nation of priests. You get the land that I give you cleaned up, and once you get that cleaned up, you are going to go out and you are going to bring the rest of the world to me. You are to go out and preach the gospel of the kingdom to the entire world. You are to go out and repair the world. This is what our commission was. We had the Great Commission at Sinai. We got tangled up in pagan sun god worship, and we became fruitless. We broke the commandments. We made our own rules and regulations up. We made our own religious systems up. And finally, the Messiah came to set us straight. Well, you go out and cry out against that great Gentile city, for their wickedness has come up in my face. But Jonah rose up and fled unto Tarshish from the presence of Yahweh. This is where everything goes black. Jonah went down to Joppa in a hired passage on a cargo vessel. When he got on board, he went down below deck and he went to sleep. Why did he go to sleep? Because he was so depressed. He had great victory in the land of Israel. There was revival going on in the land of Israel. Part of the land of Israel was getting cleaned up. It looked like good things were happening. And then the word of the Almighty said, now I want you to go to the Gentiles. Just as I told you before, you come into the land, you get it cleaned up, you get rid of every last vestige of pagan sun god worship the Canaanites brought here, and then you're going to go to the world. You're going to be my priest. You're going to be my spokesman to the entire world. Now, Jonah, I've got a job for you. I want you to be the first one, and I want you to go to Nineveh and tell the Gentiles that what they're doing is an abomination to me, and bring those people back to me. These people are sons of Shem. I want you to go to these Gentiles and let them know. And Jonah said, I would rather go into exile than to do that. He refused to do what he was commissioned to do as an Israelite and as a prophet. He got down that ship and he fell asleep because he was so morbidly depressed. A storm came up that was trashing the ship. The mariners were fearing for their lives. They were crying out to their God to save them. All their gods, any god they could think of. They began to throw the tackling and the cargo over from the ship. And the captain said, where is this passenger? He went down below deck, and Jonah is sound asleep. Not because he is so peaceful, it's because he is so morbidly depressed, he can't lift his head up. And the captain went down and said, what is going on? Get up and cry out to your God. Don't you realize we are about to die? And Jonah said, what you are experiencing is because of me. The captain said, what? Who are you? Who are you? He said, I am a prophet of the creator of the heavens and the earth. And I am disobedient. He has told me to do something, and I have refused to do it. And the only thing that you can do to stop this storm is to kill me. Because this storm is because of me. It's not because of you, it's because of me. Now, the only way to stop it is to take me up on deck and to throw me over, kill me. And the captain said, no, I'm not going to kill you. He went up and he began to cry out, and the people began to cry out to the God of Jonah now. And finally said, do not lay this man's blood upon our hands. We have nothing to do with this. He is in rebellion against you. He is the one that told us to kill him. And the storm raged even more fierce. And finally, they brought Jonah up, and they said, do not put his guilt upon us. And they threw him overboard, and immediately the storm ceased. And it says that all the mariners and the captain then cried out to the God of Jonah and made vows to the true God. Their lives were changed by his witness. It's like, man, all he has to do is open his mouth, and it changes people. And these men then made vows to God. Jonah was thrown over, and it said that there was a dag gadol, a great fish that the Almighty prepared to swallow him up. Isn't that poetic justice? He is supposed to go out and speak against Dagon, the fish god. He refuses to do it, so the Almighty prepares a great dog, a dag gadol, and it swallows him up. Well, 3 days and 3 nights later, on the beach, Jonah is spit up. And the word of Yahweh came unto Jonah the second time, and he said, arise, go to the great city of Nineveh, and proclaim that which I have commanded thee. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed from the beginning. All you have to do is read the Torah all the way through. Start at Exodus. Just read the whole book of Exodus through, and you'll see over and over and over that we are to have nothing to do with the pagan gods. We are to get cleaned up ourselves and then to go out and clean up the world. He said, if you want to have a party, okay, I can understand that. I created you as party animals, but I'm telling you how we're going to party. 3 times a year, you do it the way I say to, and don't learn the way of the heathen. If you do, I'm going to throw you out of the land. Your inheritance is going to be stripped from you, and you are going to be sorry and scattered all over the earth. You want to know why Israel got scattered all over the earth? It's because of the same sins that's going on in American Christianity today. That's why we got thrown out of the land. And don't think that judgment is not going to come and rattle the house of the Lord. Judgment begins at the house of the Lord. And he will get the attention of his people no matter what he has to do. And so, Jonah then went to Nineveh. This city was so big, it says it took 3 days to journey through it. He had gone 1 day's journey, and the people began to cry out in repentance. I assert to you, the Christian ministry in America is living the sin of Jonah, refusing to do the job and to call an abomination an abomination. Afraid to step out and to tell the Gentile world the Almighty does have a standard of how he wants to be loved. See, the first 4 commandments are how we love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. The last 6 commandments of the first 10 are how we love our neighbor as ourselves. On these 2 commandments, loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself, all the Torah and the prophets hang on those 2 commandments. But where do you read those 2 commandments? In the first 10. The first 4, how to love God. Last 6, how to love your neighbor as yourself. That is the picture of our obedience and what he has asked of us. See, I don't really see America as Babylon. I see America as Nineveh. You know that it was a little over 200 years ago that it was illegal in America to have a Christmas tree? That if you had your church doors, if you unlocked your church doors on Christmas Day, you would be thrown in jail. Because the founding fathers and the early pilgrims knew that it was all Babylonian sun god worship. And it was illegal. But what was illegal then, now has just become mainstay and no one even questions it. So here we are, the Jonah Code. The Jonah Code, and we're going to continue on with the birth of Yohanan and Yeshua. John the Baptist, I believe you call him in this part of the country, Yohanan ben Zechariah HaKohen. He was a priest of Israel. He was a son of Zechariah and Elisheva. And we are not going to be able to go to great detail on this, but this is to show you the detail in which we have pursued this, in which we have done spreadsheets detailing every single incident in the Gospels and coordinating them between the different Gospels. Here you see up on your screen, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you see the details of different things that transpire in the Gospel record and where it's located, and every one of these are synchronized. Now for me, to solve some of the chronological problems has taken well over 30 years to do so, because there are some chronological problems in the Gospels. Most of them are in the English language, and when you step back into the ancient languages, then you find the answer to them. And so it has been, part of this journey has been to go back into the original biblical reckoning of time, to restore the ancient biblical calendar so the Gospels can be understood. And right at the very beginning, we see that Luke is the one that leads off with the birth of Yohanan ben Zechariah, the son of Zechariah and Elisheva. And it starts off right from the very beginning and says that Zechariah was a priest of the sons of Aaron, and he served according to the order of Aviah. And when we are given that, we are actually given a mathematical code, a mathematical equation that allows us to pinpoint exactly when Zechariah is serving in the temple and when the announcement is made. And we see that both Zechariah and Elisheva were both of the family of Aaron. And when we're given the detail on this, then the next thing we have to do is establish the biblical reckoning of time to find out exactly when Zechariah was serving in the temple. Now, we're not going to take the time to go through all the details. I'm just going to go by this very quickly and show you that if we are going to understand when the course of Aviah is going to serve, then we have to find the parameters for the Aviv barley for that particular year. We have to find the illumination of the moon at 5 minutes after sunset and find out when the new moon of the Aviv barley is, and then we are going to find the first Sabbath after that for the first course, and now we are in play to understand exactly when Zechariah is in the temple. Zechariah's course began on the seventh day, which is the first Sabbath of the third month. It is the 49th day of the counting of the Omer, and that is exactly when the course of Aviah begins its service, and for Zechariah to be serving in the temple, for the lot to fall upon him to burn incense on the altar of incense at the time a multitude was outside of the temple at the time of the burning of incense, brings us down to one point in time, which is the high day of Shavuot. Once we have that, now we can see the rest of the details as it unfolds. I would love to tell you this story, but it would take me about an hour to tell the story about the birth of John the Baptist and all the details concerning this. And tonight, at this point, we don't have the time to do so. But I am laying this out to show you that these details, nothing has gotten between the cracks. That when we show you the dates here, I can show you by the astronomical details that on May 27th, the 4 BC, that the first sliver of the new moon appeared, 3% illuminated, and it was 18 degrees above the horizon, 5 minutes after sunset from Jerusalem. Now, that is accurate down to 1/10,000% of illumination. And so once we have the ancient calendar in place, we can discover things that have eluded us in the gospel record for hundreds and hundreds of years. But remember, we were waiting for the time that knowledge would increase. And men are now running to and fro at speeds measured in nanoseconds. So we see exactly when the announcement was made that Zechariah and Elisheva were going to have a son, and that is made by the angel Gabriel. And I just have to point out this, that was really an incredible moment in time, because the honor, the duty of burning incense on the altar of incense only happened once in the lifetime of a priest. Once he fulfilled that, it was no longer available to him. And so now, Zechariah, an old man, finally the lot falls on him to burn incense on the altar of incense. He's an old man, his wife Elisheva, well stricken in years. It says, but yet she was barren. They didn't have any children. And it was such a strange thing, because the scriptures say that if you are obedient to keep the commandments in the Torah, then you will be fruitful. You will not be barren. And so for these two, which it was said that in all the commandments and ordinance of the Lord, they were absolutely blameless, yet to not have any children, it looked like something was wrong. To their friends and family, it looked like there must be some kind of hidden sin. And so now, near the end of Zechariah's life, near the end of his priesthood service, finally the lot falls on him, and he goes into the holy place as a Cohen to burn incense on the altar of incense at the time the multitude is out praying. It is the time of Shavuot. And then the angel Gabriel appears standing in the right-hand side of the altar of incense. And as soon as Zechariah sees the angel, whatever happens to him, the angel has to respond, Zechariah, don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. It's okay. Apparently, this was a rather awesome being that was standing on the right-hand side of the altar of incense. And the angel said, your prayer's been heard, and you are going to have a son. Now, I believe that Zechariah quit praying about having a son many years before, because how did he answer the angel? He said, well, excuse me, I'm an old man. My wife is well stricken in years. It's long past the time that we can have any children. And he said, how am I going to know this? And the angel responded, well, excuse me. I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of Almighty God, and I have been sent to deliver this message to you. That's not good enough? Behold, you are going to be deaf and not able to speak until all these things come to pass. Now, I know your King James Version says you will be dumb and not able to speak, but take a look at what it says in the original and then watch what happens, because remember that 9 months later, when John was born, his son was born, and the 8th day came and the mohel was there to do the circumcision, that the mohel asked Elisheba, who was the only one in the family that could speak, what shall his name be called? She said, his name shall be called Yohanan. And the mohel says, oy vey, you can't call him Yohanan. None of your relatives are named Yohanan. It has to be like Zechariah the 14th or something. And it says that they made signs to Zechariah. Why did they have to make signs to Zechariah? Because he couldn't hear. And then Zechariah, it says that Zechariah called for the writing slate. Did he call by saying, excuse me, hand me the writing slate? No, he motioned. And when he wrote his name, immediately his mouth was opened and he let roar a prophecy that the people said, what manner of child is this going to be? And this is noise throughout all the hill country of Judea. See, he was deaf and not able to speak. But that really answers the question that he proposed to the angel. How am I going to know this thing? I'm an old man. My wife, she can't have any children. She never has. And he said, you are going to be deaf and dumb till all these things are accomplished. Bam! At that moment, he was struck deaf and dumb. The last words he heard for the next 9 months were the words of the angel. The last words he spoke were the words questioning the angel. Do you think that that helped his faith? Yeah, he couldn't hear his wife, Elisheba. Zechariah, get away from me, you dirty old man. No, for the next 9 months, he couldn't hear, he couldn't speak until all these things were fulfilled. So, this is the day that it was announced. Then Zechariah returned home, the conception of Yohanan ben Zechariah, shortly after that. And then it says in the 6th month of Elisheba's pregnancy, that's when the angel Gabriel came to Miriam in Nazareth and announced that she would bear the light of the world. It was the end of the Feast of Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, the Feast of Lights, that the announcement came that she would bear the light of the world. And it says in those days, Miriam visits Elisheba. She immediately left as fast as she could. Why did she go immediately to see Elisheba? Because the angel said, you are going to bear the Son of God. And Miriam said, how am I going to know this? I know not a man. And the angel said, behold, you're going to be deaf and not able to speak till all these. No. He said, this will be a sign to you, that your cousin, your relative, Elisheba, who is called barren by everybody in your family, has conceived, and it's her 6th month. Nobody knew about it. She had hidden herself away, told nobody for 5 months. Now the 6th month, the angel tells Miriam, and Miriam knows now that her cousin is pregnant. She is over a week's journey away. The news hasn't gotten up there. And so immediately, Miriam then leaves to go visit her cousin. And as soon as she gets to the home of Zechariah and Elisheba, and she then cries out for Elisheba, Elisheba then hears her voice and then says, as soon as I heard your voice, the babe leaped in my womb. What is this to me, that the mother of my Lord should come unto me? And it is true that the words that the angel has spoken to you will be fulfilled. Do you think that that helped Mary's believing? Her faith was increased incredibly when the words that came out of her cousin's mouth confirmed everything that the angel had told her. No one else even knew that Elisheva was pregnant. Well, after spending about 3 months with her, at the time that John the Baptist is born, it is Passover. The very time that we had set a place at the Passover table for Elijah, the prophet who came in the spirit and power of Elijah, was born at that very time. And then we go around 6 months around the year. But we stop off because not only do we have the biblical record of the things that are transpiring, but we also have astronomical observations. Remember all of the times that it speaks of in the Gospels about Yeshua's star, about the Chaldean astronomer seeing his star in the rising? What time did his star appear? What were they talking about? They were talking about astronomical observations that the astronomers were well aware of, that we can go back in time and duplicate those very same moments in time. And that is why we can find out exactly when these different astronomical observations took place in the 5th month, and then the great sign in the heavens spoken of in Revelation 12:1, which happened on the Day of Trumpets, and this was the major astronomical observation. Remember, the Day of Trumpets, the first day of the 7th month, that is the day of the blowing of trumpets, when we are to remember the Torah that was given to us at Mount Sinai, when the Almighty shouted down his commandments. Well, every year, the Day of Trumpets occurs on a day and hour that no man knows, because it is the only feast, the only high Sabbath that occurs on the first day of the month. And how do we know when the first day of the month is? When the first sliver of the new moon appears after sundown. We don't know if we're going to see it, but we're going to watch for it. And when it appears, that moment is a high Sabbath, the Day of Trumpets, the day of the awakening trumpet. And it was at that point in time that this constellation, Betula, this is what was seen. In Revelation 12:1, it says, there appeared a great sign in the heavens, a woman. And who is the woman in the heavens? Betula, the virgin. And it says that she was clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. When the first sliver of the new moon appeared that night, announcing the Day of Trumpets, the crown above her head of 12 stars is Ariel, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Not Leo, but Ariel, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Between the feet of this constellation is a star called Hamalek in Hebrew, which means the king. In Latin, it's called Regulus, regal, the king. Remember, it was Jacob that prophesied over his son Judah that the scepter, the rulership, will not depart from between the feet of Judah until the Messiah comes. That star between the feet of that constellation is called the king. And at that moment, when the first sliver of the new moon appeared beneath the feet of Betula, announcing the Day of Trumpets, that is when the planet Jupiter, which in Hebrew is Hatzedek, came into conjunction with Hamalek. That is when the announcement of the birth of the righteous king, the lion of the tribe of Judah, was made in the heavens, announcing the soon birth of the Messiah. This is what the Chaldean astronomers had been searching the heavens for 500 years, since the time of Daniel, knowing that there will be a great sign in the heavens that will announce his birth, and they will then bring a treasure that had been put in their hands across the land and deliver it into the hands of the Messiah. The whole detail of this is in the, I believe, the second edition of our Rood Awakening series, that you'll want to see all that. But we see that right after that great sign in the heavens, just about immediately after that, Joseph and Miriam leave for Sukkot in those days. They leave for the Feast of Sukkot. Now, why are they leaving for the Feast of Sukkot? Because everyone goes up to the feast. And the prophet Micah has said the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. So even though they are living in Nazareth, they are Netzers who are living in Nazareth, yet the hometown is Bethlehem. They know the Messiah is going to be born there, but it's also another very significant date. This is the year in 3 BC, which is the 25th year of the reign of Caesar Augustus. According to the Roman records, that year, everyone in the empire was required to register their support for naming Caesar Augustus the father of the Roman Empire. Now, it's amazing what in Rome has not been destroyed, because I was able to get a photograph of this at a construction site. This is a statue of Imperial Caesar Divine Augustus, the father of our country. This is what is still standing in Rome today. That is what was put up as a result of that enrollment, in which everyone in the empire had to register their support for naming him the father of the Roman Empire in the 25th year of his reign, which was in 3 before the Common Era. Now you're going to see the rest of the detail as it all falls in place, because even though she was about to be delivered here, when the great sign of the heavens happened, Yeshua was born at the Feast of Tabernacles, when the Word is made flesh and tabernacled among us. We could go into great detail on that, but we don't have the time right now. And then we see 8 days later, he was circumcised on the last great day, another high Sabbath, and then we see that from his birth until his dedication, 40 days later, in which he is brought into the temple, and the prophet Shimon and Hannah both prophesied over him at that particular point. The different astronomical observations that are detailed, we can go around the year and see exactly when they take place during this particular year. And then we come around to a year after Yeshua's birth, another astronomical observation 2 days before his second year begins. And this is about the time that the Chaldean astronomers would have left Babylon for Jerusalem, and then arriving in the 9th month. And how we can detail that is because it says that when they came out from giving their testimony to Herod, they saw his star in the rising. Astronomers make their observations at night after the sun sets, and in the morning just before the sun rises. They saw his star in the rising. We can go back and duplicate that moment in time and position ourselves right at Jaffa Gate, which in those days was Herod's palace, and we can see that his star would then appear directly over Bethlehem from the city gate of Jerusalem in the morning observations, allowing us to nail it down and see that they arrived in Jerusalem just shortly before Hanukkah. And then we have another astronomical observation, which is extremely important, because just a few weeks later, we have a lunar eclipse in which Herod executed 2 rabbis by burning them alive, and Herod died within just a couple of months of this execution. So we are able to find the year that Yeshua was born. We're going to find when his ministry begins, and we're going to find the exact day in which his crucifixion takes place, and the day and the hour of his resurrection. All of this can be now known, which has only been guesswork up until this point in time. So now we are ready to go into the 70-week ministry of Yeshua. Are you ready for the ride of your life? Okay. So as we see the details in here, I've just put some red arrows for here to show you that the Gospel of John says nothing about these first few events right here. And then the rest of the Gospels are silent, while John then takes over and then teaches us some things. Now, first of all, it's important to understand that Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record the baptism of Yeshua and his temptation in the wilderness. My first question is, was Matthew there at his baptism? Matthew is going to be at a toll booth collecting toll taxes for another 4 months. Were Matthew, Mark, or Luke there during his temptation in the wilderness? No, but they got their information and wrote down from the first-hand witness, who was Yeshua. So what we're going to show is the beginning of Yeshua's ministry exactly when he was baptized. Now, what we're going to show is that much of what we learn in the Gospels concerning the dates of things is by reverse engineering. What I mean by that is that many times we are told where Yeshua shows up at the feast at Jerusalem. Now, I can determine exactly what day the feast begins on. These days can be known down to a 10 millionth of a day. Now, once we know when he shows up, then we see it says in 3 days before that, this happened, and 4 days before that, this happened, and so a lot of it is by reverse engineering. Such as the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, you read all through Yeshua's teaching, and he teaches about the last day and the resurrection over and over and over, and finally you come to the very end of the chapter, and it says, "This spake he in the synagogue at Capernaum." Oh, great. Thanks for telling me at the end where he was. Now, what I have to do is go all the way back to the beginning and put myself in the synagogue there and understand, put myself in the context. Because I can go over there and sit in the synagogue and read this, and I can get the full context of these things. So many times we are given the details at the end of a long series. Sometimes you go for 2 chapters and then find out where Yeshua was and what he was teaching. And when you find out that it was at Hanukkah, at the feast in Jerusalem, then you can go back and you can nail exactly what day it was. So I'm going to show you this, and in a few moments you'll understand how the details come together. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record this event. John does not. Watch what happens here. Yeshua is baptized. He is mikvahed in the Jordan by John. And it happens this year on 16 February, and it's 27 of the Common Era. That was day 1, week 1. Now, as soon as Yeshua came up out of the water, it says that the Spirit of God, in the form of a dove, came and rested upon him and stayed on him. And it says that when he came out of the water, he immediately was driven by the Spirit into the wilderness, where he fasted for how many days? 40 days. And at the end of 40 days, he afterward was hungered. Meta, afterward he hungered, and that is when Hasatan came to him and tempted him. After he overcame the temptation, the angels ministered to him, which I would imagine was giving him food and water, since he had been without for over 40 days at that point. And then we see what transpires next on this. So we know where he's going to be for the next 40 days. Watch what happens here, because it concludes the 40-day fast, and then on the last day of the 12th month, that is when Yeshua is tempted by Satan. The angels ministered to him. Now, it is on this very day that the Gospel of John begins. But I'm going to turn the page, because remember, it's the 30th day of the 12th month. I'm going to turn the page, and we're going to put Adar 30 right up here, okay? Because on that same day, this is where the Gospel of John begins. The Gospel of John does not tell about Yeshua's baptism. The Gospel of John starts off this way. There were Levites and Kohanim, priests, who came from Jerusalem. They were sent by the Pharisees to John to ask him, "Are you the Messiah?" And he said, "I am not." And then he said, they said, "Are you the prophet?" The prophet, what prophet are we talking about? The prophet of whom Moses spoke that we must obey. And he said, "I am not." See, at the time, we didn't know if the Messiah and the prophet were one and the same, or if they might be 2 different individuals. We didn't know. The Pharisees were covering their bases. They sent the Levites and Kohanim down to ask John, "Are you the prophet? Are you the Messiah?" He said, "I am not. I'm the voice of one crying in the wilderness to prepare the way of the Lord." And then John gave this testimony to the Kohanim and the Levites sent by the Pharisees. He said that the one that sent me to baptize, the same said unto me, upon whom I see the Holy Spirit descend in the form of a dove and remain on him, he is the one that will baptize with the Holy Spirit and with fire. I'm not even worthy to unloose his sandals. And then he said, I saw such a one come unto me, and I didn't know who he was. But when he went down into the water, and he came up out of the water, I saw the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove descend from heaven as the heavens departed, and the Holy Spirit remained on him. And then I heard a voice from heaven saying, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And I bear record. I heard it. I saw it. The next day, John was standing with two of his disciples, Andrew and another unnamed disciple, which turns out was John. He never named himself. And he saw Yeshua coming out of the wilderness after he had been out there now for 41 days. And he said, behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world. And immediately Andrew and John joined themselves to him and say, Master, Rabbi, where do you dwell? And he said, come and see. And it says they first went and found Kepha, Shimon Kepha, Simon Peter, Andrew's brother, because they were all disciples of John. They were all there in the area, so they found Peter, and they all went and spent the night with Yeshua because the day was far spent. And then in the morning, they got up early and they traveled north to the Kinneret, where Philip had been fishing all night. Philip was from Bethsaida, from the same village that Peter and John and Andrew were from. And so they joined themselves to Philip and then went up to Bethsaida. They got in the boat and went up to Bethsaida. Now, here's something that's important to understand. That the Gospel of John doesn't tell us about the baptism. The Gospel of John tells us John, as he gives his record of the baptism to the Levites and Kohanim. He is doing it on this very day that Yeshua is being tempted. Now, the following day, after he gave his testimony, that's what the Gospel of John says, the day following, John was staying there with two of his disciples as Yeshua came out of the wilderness, and he came out of the wilderness on Aviv 1, the beginning of the acceptable year of the Lord. The year begins when the first of the new moon appears, the barley is Aviv, and Yeshua walks out of the wilderness, and John the Baptist, who is the priest, he is the high priest ordained by the Almighty, not Annas, not Caiaphas. They were ordained by Rome. But Johanan, he was ordained by the Almighty. He was the forerunner, and he said, behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world. It was Aviv 1. Yeshua stepped out of the wilderness across the Jordan River, and that begins the acceptable year of the Lord. Now it begins to make sense. Now I know all of us have seen television. We've seen the movies. Yeshua is walking along and John says, oh, behold the Lamb of God which takes away the sin of the world. Then he gets baptized. No. If you read one gospel record, you can come up with some really loony ideas. You have to read all of the records and read them carefully and find out actually what's being reported and get Hollywood out of your mind. Now, what happens at that point? Behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world. And as I mentioned, Peter, John, and Andrew join up and spend the night with him. The day is far spent. And then the following morning, they meet up with Philip. They get in the boat with him. The only option is to go around the swampy side of the Kinneret, which, you know, they wouldn't do it. They just get in the boat with him. He'd been fishing all night. Then they join up with him, and they go back to Bethsaida. And when they get there, then Philip found who? Nathanael. And then they told Nathanael, we found the Messiah. He's from Nazareth. And he said, wait just a minute. You know, have you read the scriptures? Nothing good comes out of Nazareth. And he said, come on, come and see. Well, we won't detail exactly what happened with Nathanael at that point, except Yeshua tells him something that can only be known by divine revelation. And Nathanael says, you are the Messiah. He said, because I said that, you haven't seen anything yet. And then it says that after 3 days, or the third day, that is when they were in Cana of Galilee, for a wedding. Now, what's happening at this wedding is that Yeshua's mother, Miriam, obviously has some kind of responsibility there, because when they come to the wedding, then she told Yeshua they have run out of wine. And the King James is a little difficult here, because it says, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" That's really not right at all. It's more like, "Ma'am." It's not woman. It's not a derogatory term. It's, "Ma'am, what concern is this of yours and mine? My hour is not yet come. My time is not yet come." What is it talking about? When you are invited to a wedding in Israel, you as a guest are required to bring something for the wedding. It's this way in the land of Israel now. The rules have changed a little bit, but still the guests are the ones that are required to bring things. And if you're invited to the wedding, then you have a particular thing that you are supposed to bring, such as wine. And those who are closer in the family, more closely related, they have their time that they're supposed to provide. But when he came, he said, "Wait, just a minute. It's not my time. It's not my responsibility." Now, we're going to find out, first of all, that it's a Pharisee wedding, which is going to get interesting right from the very beginning. It's a Pharisee wedding, and I'll show you how we know that. Because his mother finally turns to the servants and says, "Whatever he tells you to do, do it, and don't question anything, okay? Just do it." Because he said, "Okay, I'll provide wine, but I'm going to do it my way." And it says that there were 6 stone water pots there for the purifying of the Jews. For the purifying of the Jews. What does the term Jews mean in the Gospel of John? The Pharisee religious leaders. That's right, you can search the Torah from beginning to end, and you will never find one single word about stone water pots for purification. This is a pure rabbinic manufactured concept. And the only place you're going to find it is in the Talmud. And the Talmud tells us exactly how these stone water pots are to be used. First of all, these stone water pots are used for purifying water which has been contaminated, and it is not ritually clean. They put water in, contaminated water that's not ritually pure, and they fill it all the way to the top, to the very brim. And then they take ropes and they lower this stone water pot down into a mikvah, which is a pool of running water. And just as soon as the water of the mikvah, the baptism pool, you would think, kisses the water which is at the top of this jug, as soon as it touches it, kisses it, the rabbinic term, then it is immediately brought up, and now it is made clean, ritually pure. Now, according to the Talmud, what makes water ritually impure is if it has the slightest taste of wine. Yeshua sees these 6 water pots of stone. He says, fill them up all the way to the brim. See, he knows what he's talking about. He knows what the rule is. Fill them all the way up to the brim. Now, take a ladle of this and take it over to the governor of the feast, who is no doubt a Pharisee, and give him some to drink. And as soon as he tasted it, he said, "This is the best wine I've ever had." If he knew where that water had come from, where that wine had come from, he would have gone right through the ceiling. Because Yeshua has just defiled the very essence of what these stone water pots are all about. The very first miracle he does is goes right in the face of rabbinic tradition against rules and regulations that the Pharisees had made up of their own accord. And remember, what is the basic foundational commandment of the Torah? Thou shalt not add one commandment to the words that I command you. You shall not diminish one commandment. No one is allowed to add. No one is allowed to subtract. Now they have made up a whole series of rules and regulations about pure water and impure water in these stone vessels and how they are to be used, and Yeshua throws it all right in their face, showing them that they have no authority whatsoever. This is nonsense. Now, it doesn't tell us what happened, but I personally believe that, the word finally gets out where the water came from. And I think that there's a little bit of a scuffle going on. We're going to see this because this is not an isolated incident. It's Yeshua's first miracle, but yet, see, in the Western world, when we read this, we just read right on past it. We don't understand that Yeshua is deliberately violating every man-made rule and regulation that the religious system of his day and time had come up with. We're going to see it as it develops. So this is when this takes place, and what happens after the wedding feast? The next day it says they went over to Capharnaum. They were right here in Cana. It takes nearly a day to get there, and they go down there and they stay for not many days. Why not many days? Because they're going down there for the Sabbath. It's a seaside resort. They're going to rest, and then early the first day of the week, then they are going to leave for Jerusalem. Now, how do we know they're going to leave then, early the first day of the week? Because this year, the Passover is going to begin at sundown on Thursday evening. And so they have got to get from the Galilee up to Jerusalem. And so they can make it by the 12th if they really are on a dead run, but most likely they get there on the 13th. And when they get in on the 13th, remember, the 13th at sunset, that's when the gates of the Temple Mount close. That's why Yeshua gets up there on the 13th before the gates close, and he gets rid of the leaven off the Temple Mount. He drives the money changers. He gets the sin off the Temple Mount before the sun sets, because the temple has got to be cleansed before sunset on the 13th. And so that's how we know when Yeshua is there to get the leaven out of the temple at that point in time. So he drives the money changers and all the animals off the Temple Mount and begins to set things straight right at that point, because at sunset, that is when the Passover is then, we begin the preparation for the Passover. The Passover lamb is actually going to be killed on the afternoon of the 14th, which is going to be on a Friday afternoon of this particular year. This is Yeshua's first year of his ministry. Now, we're going to go back in time just a little bit to what it says in Luke chapter 3, verse 23. Yeshua began being about 30 years of age, and this is referring to the time of his baptism. Now, this is important because I'm going to teach you some chronology here, and what we are going to do is that we are going to find fatal errors in chronology. Yeshua began being about 30 years of age. How do you begin being about anything? 30 years. The word began is commenced. And, in fact, some of the translations commenced his ministry, and that's accurate. He commenced his ministry being about 30 years of age. That sounds quite general, doesn't it? So here I put a timeline here with 30 years of age right here. And if the word about is the word peri in Greek, which is perimeter, around, or about, then he could be 28, he could be 32. You know, it all depends on how big you want to draw the circle. I've seen people say that he is anywhere from 23 to 37. If he's just about 30 years of age, how big do you want to draw the circle? It all depends on what kind of chronology you're trying to promote. But the word about is not the word peri. Yeshua began, Hosea, 30 years of age. The word Hosea means nearing or before a point. What is the point? 30 years of age. He is nearing, but before the point of 30 years of age. This is a mathematical Greek construction that you can't get out of. If it said that he was about 29, then you would know that he is nearing but not yet reached his 29th year. However, in this case, the mathematical construction is having not yet reached 30 years of age. He began about having not yet reached 30 years of age. So now we have Yeshua's timeline from when he was born. This is his first year. Now, I know in Western thinking, you count 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 weeks, and then on the first birthday, you say that a person's 1 year old. That's not biblical or Eastern reckoning at all. When you are born, it's your first year. Okay? Now, having not yet reached his 30th year brings us down to this end. Right here would be the beginning of his 30th year. But remember, this is before Passover. It's a half year before Yeshua's birthday, right? Yeshua was born in the fall of the year. This is when John, his cousin, was born. And so he was about, having not yet reached 30 years of age, he was literally in the midst of his 29th year when his mikvah took place. Now watch how this plays out. Here is the timeline, 20 before the Common Era, all the way to 36 of the Common Era. And I'm just showing you here that every single block is mathematically described. There's no way for me to fudge the figures if every block that I put up here is mathematically described. From 20 before the Common Era to 36, and there's nothing missing here. You'll notice there is no year zero. Now, it says in Luke 3:1, Yochanan ben Zechariah, John the Baptist, began baptizing in the Jordan in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. So we have a couple of opportunities here. One is Caesar Augustus adopted Tiberius as his son. In the fall of 12 of the Common Era, that is when Caesar Augustus became very ill and Tiberius took over the day-to-day operations of running the empire. It is called the co-regency because Tiberius Caesar ran everything, but Caesar Augustus was still emperor on the throne. Not for long, because 2 years later, in the fall, in the month of August, Caesar Augustus is going to die, and at that moment, then Tiberius is going to take over full time. But right here, using this, first of all, we're going to use this, is in the fall of the year 12, when Tiberius began taking over the day-to-day responsibilities for the empire, and Tiberius is very much linked with Israel because, of course, the city of Tiberias is named after him. Then we find out that his 15th year is in the winter of 26 and 27 of the Common Era. Now, let's look at the rest of the detail here. Yeshua said unto them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. This is his first Passover during his ministry. And then said the Jews, the Pharisee religious leaders, 46 years was this temple in building, and you're going to raise it up in 3 days? Wait just a minute. 46 years in building, according to Josephus, the temple began its reconstruction under Herod in 19 before the Common Era, and that brings us up to this date. Right here, the temple began its reconstruction. It was year 1 that coincides with 19 before the Common Era. At the other end of this, we see the 46th year of the building of the temple coincides with 27 of the Common Era, which also coincides with the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Exactly right down the line. I'm going to give you every Roman record and every biblical record and show exactly when these things cross each other so that we can make no mistake of when Yeshua's ministry began. But right at this point, we know that right here, 27 of the Common Era in the spring is the 46th year of the building of the temple. It's also the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar.